We're here with Griff, Ralf Reichert.
Hello.
Okay. The first time I ever heard of the name SK, you were playing in SK. It was just a team in Germany, and I was obviously nothing to do with SK at the time.
When was that?
Like 1998, 1999,
Yeah.
way back in Quake World days.
Yeah.
Like obviously the team, it was started by you and your two brothers.
Yes.
Was it literally started as in like just a fun team? Was it always the intention like we have to be competitive? What was the mindset to making the team?
Well, we were playing Quake for fun at our house, basically, with a lot of friends. All of them were local, and I mean the internet back then was still a new thing. I mean, I got my first home internet. I went 1993. I went to the university. That's when I first got in touch with the internet. At the university, you had these mainframe PCs there. I was playing some mods, so like MMOs with text, basically, for the guys who don't know what that is. And the good thing about going to the university was that you got very early access from home to the internet for a reasonable price. You only had to pay the phone cost, not a provider cost on top, which was basically the same again. So a normal guy had to pay double than a student.
It was like subsidized?
No, not really. Well, you always had to pay, when you were not in the university, when you went in with modem, you had to pay your telephone fees. And if you had to order like a commercial provider, you had to basically pay the same fees which occurred for the telephone to the provider again. So every private person had double the cost the student had. So we were a little bit like lucky, the students back at that time. So I got my first modem in 1995 probably. Well, we were gamers all the time, so we LAN partied with various games, Doom, a lot of Command and Conquer actually. And at one point in time, 1996, I think, Quake came out, which we obviously played with keyboard, without a mouse,
no one used
all
the
that
mouse
crazy
then,
stuff. And then at some point there, Quake World came out. I tried a little bit Quake 1 in the internet, solo, without my brothers. We were just playing on the network. And then with Quake World there, I found out that there was an online scene. There were a couple of probably 100 people in the German scene playing Quake regularly. I learned from them that you can play with a mouse, so they were like blindingly fast in my eyes in terms of movement. So we learned all that stuff, and then we found out, okay, you just cannot play only FFA, you can play in a team against each other, which we partly did at home, but very basic. You could play one-on-one, and so there were the first small leagues, the first small tournaments, and we said like, yeah, we want to be part of that. Let's try it. The SK back at that time were basically two groups. It was me, my friends, and my middle oldest brother. We were all like...
That one's Burke?
Yes, Burke.
Okay, yeah.
We were like 20, what was it, like 17 years ago, 15 years ago. We were like 20 to 24. And then we had the small guys, my little brother Kane, Benjamin. He and his two best friends were like 13, 14, something like that. So we really had these two groups. We played actually each other in teams back then as well. And then we mixed it together and started competing online. And we were like obviously beaten to hell in the first games because we had no clue about all that stuff, all that, the crowdsourcing learning thing. We were cut from that until that. But we did relatively fast, relatively well, invested a lot of time, and then said like, hey, this is fun. We were competitive people, we were all playing soccer. We want to get the best.
Did the fact that you had like your brothers to play with as well give you kind of an initial boost in terms of like you're learning stuff together, like their minds, like the team play aspect? Would you have still done it like solo if your brothers hadn't been into the game?
I probably, it was more the social aspect. It was what you said. It was like that we obviously came along very easy and very well, and I could command them around as well because I was the oldest one. They accepted my authority back then. But it was more that we had fun doing it together. It was actually the fun that made us continue and train and work hard and all that stuff because we wanted to achieve something together. If I would probably had to join like just an online clan with anonymous people I've never met, I wouldn't be that intrigued.
Ah, okay.
I guess
That's the thing that kept you pushing to go beyond
exactly.
that.
Well, yeah, exactly. It was like the social. We were a group. We were a team. We've been from the beginning a team of the three brothers and actually three other friends of us. There came more, and we were like overall local people from Oberhausen, where that all started. I think about 8 people. So we could actually regularly play 4-on-4 just on LAN.
Ah, okay.
So it was mainly a social thing, and then there was our ambitions were unlocked, and we wanted to get the best, and we tried, and to some extent succeeded. Not always, but we did pretty well.
I've heard it said, or maybe it's been in press releases or something, like SK was the first clan or something in Europe.
No, that's not true. No, we never said that.
Maybe people just said it as like a lazy journalism or something.
Yeah,
but I mean, I figured it was from the sense that the teams before then, none of them ever went on to become famous. So no one would probably remember those names. So is there a team back then before you got good, who like that was the team for you, or like a player?
Absolutely. In Germany, there was a team which was called Die Fette Faust, and if you Google that, DFF, yeah. If you Google that,
who was playing for them? Who's the best player?
He was called Bit. He was like their star player. They were a group of students from Braunschweig, a German city. And then you had Ocrana back then, which were around for a long time.
Yeah. They were famously dueling with SK a lot.
And actually, Death Row was alive back then as
the
well.
Americans,
so they were, and Team 9 actually too. So if you would look at our idols from the early time, or our role models to some extent, it would be these 4 teams actually.
And were they, aside from when you got better and you were competing, like for example with Ocrana, before then they were much better than you?
Yeah, I mean, they've been around longer, so they knew all that stuff which you pick up pretty easily, like the mouse play, the team play, rocket jumps, for example. The thing I learned on the internet.
Yeah.
We didn't knew before.
Yeah.
It's a typical thing that you always have when you play in a small group. I mean, how many people are out there who think I'm the best FIFA player in the world, unless they go to the internet?
Yeah.
It got better because the online function is good, but like 5 years ago, there were probably worldwide 10,000 people who thought they were the best people in the world and never played outside their friendhood. No, coming back to the initial thing, SK claims to be the first clan. No, what we did first, or very early, or one of the first, was to get a multi-gaming clan. So that we added, beside Quake, actually Counter-Strike. So we've been really early with that, and with Warcraft as well. That was more the pioneer thing rather than being the first clan, because there have been good clans before.
When you were just the Quake World team and you were still playing, I mean, you mentioned Ocrana. The interesting thing is, because a lot of the teams from that period of time either haven't transitioned in the same way into being big organizations, or they're not as famous names. I mean, like, we have like Ocrana, for example. From what I've heard and what I remember, SK wasn't necessarily like the best, like the absolute best German team.
No, it wasn't.
Weren't you like losing to Ocrana quite often?
Yes.
Were they the best?
We were pretty much on par. I mean, we always suspected them of cheating. There were
something dodgy.
Yeah, like one of the players who played in their lineup, we caught cheating on a LAN party. Basically, they had a private hack. They had it. I'm not saying that they always used it. And actually, the people I'm still in touch with, for example, Slop, which was their star player. He's a friend on Facebook. We regularly talk. He's an awesome guy, and I would agree he never cheated. So I would never really consider him a cheater. But there was some dodgy stuff. They had most of the time better internet connections, and they basically refused back then to play on LAN, which we always tried to push. But it was a healthy and funny rivalry, looking back, which actually pushed all of us further. So it was cool. But what we did different than the other teams as well, and probably did as a first known team, is we actually got some international players in there. We got we really early started to an English homepage, like I think 1997 or 1998 latest, where like every other team was just very local focused. We got Hakim and Timber,
and
two
Ake.
Ake, two best UK
Xerox,
players.
quite a few international players.
Exactly. We did that really early. And yeah, we tried always to push the limits to some extent. And
what was the thinking in bringing in those teams?
One thing to add, and then in I think 1998, the scene was already split into Quake 1 and Quake 2.
Yeah.
Because I came out relatively early. I always recall that it felt like it was 10 years between both games, but it was not. So, for example, MTW was a big Quake 2 team, and so there was an indirect rivalry with them for media, for sponsorships as well. Sorry.
When you brought in the international players, that's something I wanted to bring up actually, because at the time, people won't remember this now because of the way teams are set up now, where you essentially do just get the best players, and sometimes you will take someone from another country.
Exactly.
Back then, in all games, it used to be so segregated. You'd even have within countries, okay, we're all from this city and you're from this city. We won't take someone even. And so to actually bring someone like one Swedish player in and then one English player was kind of like a new idea. What was the thinking behind doing it?
It was two things. I mean, we had this social group which worked well, which worked as a team. But both of my brothers were very heavy into soccer, so they had obligations which they had to play every Sunday on their pitch. They couldn't leave their team, so they could only here and then really participate. Plus, Benjamin then, he was like 16, so he was a young, crazy young adult.
Sure.
So from time to time he had other things to do. So we really, as a lot of the people, a lot of the SK members played like on a daily basis. We needed a pool of 8 to 12 players to really have team games every day. It's like, some are having other things. So that's where we were looking at additional players. We first took in some German players, but they were not on our level, to be honest. They were too bad. So then we started to look for international players and thought it was the early days of the internet. We thought it was cool. It was cool to have friends in England. It was not typical. It was cool to have people from Sweden with Ake. And actually Therion was the first real international player. He was an outstanding player.
From like Switzerland or something?
Yes, exactly. He was like, we learned a lot from him back in the very, very early days. Well, that was even 1997. So it was just basically out of the necessity to get good players, to have more regular practice. And practice for us was really fun. It was really, really, really fun. And then the other side, that we were pretty easily international, or pretty early international, and thought like it's just a logical step. It's cool and fun, and therefore we got more connections into other countries as well. We were invited by local tournaments, which back then even paid our trips. There was a prizes you could get, so we could go to a lot of tournaments into Europe only due to the fact that we had international players actually. That made us special.
The thing people probably won't remember about that era of Quake is because the way Quake's marketed now in terms of an esport is always 1v1. That was always the big money and all the draw. And people forget that actually Quake's basis was always Team Deathmatch. Even the famous duo players, they came from the Team Deathmatch teams.
Absolutely, yes.
Was it always Team Deathmatch for you? That was your main interest always?
100%. I mean, if you look at the time we spent this Quake, it will probably be 10 to 20% CTF actually, which we played a lot in the early days, which was most fun before you knew how team play worked, because it was like, it forced you to team play. Yeah. So playing like our 3-on-3s, we played a lot of 3-on-3s on LAN, was in the early days 90% CTF. So, and then we played, of course, FFA was a big thing too. It's probably 20% of my total Quake time I played FFA. I actually uploaded a FFA demo a couple of weeks ago. One of the few FFA tournaments that was out there, and obviously I won, that's why I uploaded it. So I got best German players back then, but whatever. And then there was like probably 40 to 50% team deathmatch. That was our total focus. That was what a clan was about as well. And then it was like 20, 30%. I'm adding a little bit too much, but one-on-one. One-on-one was really focusing on tournaments, preparing for tournaments. Yes, we did that. Playing it here and then for fun before or after we played Team Deathmatch. Yes. Or if there wasn't enough players available. But if we could, we would always play Team Deathmatch. And we not only would play 4-on-4, we would play 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, even online 6-on-6, 8-on-8 on the huge maps. So team was always our focus. We were a social glue. That was what was most fun out of us in every type of combination.
I think people I know like a lot of the good thing about 1v1 is it's good to draw a new person in.
Yes.
And it's kind of got a low threshold to get an entry point, whereas obviously team, you need to understand the basics, then you need to know how a team works, and then there's building higher and higher to really appreciate it.
It's
do you ever
much
feel
harder
like,
to get it.
Do you ever feel like with the fact that, obviously it makes sense early on why one-on-one took off, because you only need to send one guy to a tournament, it's really cheap. When you see that, for example, games like Counter-Strike came along only a couple of years later, and you have to send 5 people to the event, but it managed to build up a scene, and team was accepted as like the format. Do you ever feel like Quake maybe missed a step there by never fully pushing the team deathmatch aspect?
Absolutely, yes. For me, the main reason Quake is pretty much dead. Don't get me wrong, Quake fans. I've been there from the first minute, so there's probably not a lot of people who love the game more than I do, but I think that the whole Quake scene focus and actually the focus where the developer pushed it a little bit wasn't team is a huge issue. And that's why it's basically non-existent in the high competitive scene anymore. I'm 100% sure, and if you look at the most successful game today, which is obviously League of Legends, it's a team game. The most successful game in history is, without a doubt, at least in the Western world, Counter-Strike. It's a team game. StarCraft is now something very different, and Warcraft was as well. They will do good, although if you look at just the player numbers, they are not as big as you think they are. It's a spectator sport, it's great to watch, but for example, I can't be bothered to play 6 hours of StarCraft in a row because it's way too stressing. One-on-one is always so much more pressure. It's so less relaxing, and you don't have the social fun. So I'm all for T games, and I think there will always be a place for one-on-one games, but the bigger mass phenomenon will always be team games. And I think the MOBA genre shows that as good as it can.
From seeing the success of League of Legends, actually, and thinking about the fact that because Counter-Strike itself is declining a bit and Quake's obviously declined a lot, it's made me, I wanted to put this theory to you and see what you thought of it, because part of the problem I think is that for League of Legends, if you're the brand new player who's never played the game before, the system is all set up so that instantly you're into a game, you're in with a team, they're sort of matched to your level.
Scripted.
But I mean, even in Counter-Strike, which is a team game, you have to find people who are willing to play with you. The basic mode of public doesn't really work as well in Counter-Strike. And look what you were saying about playing free-for-all in Quake there. Quake 3 and all the games after Quake 1, basically, the free-for-all wasn't so good, and that was the first thing someone would play before they ever find out.
That would be your entrance.
With Quake World, it always seemed like the way the beginner would get into a game and you'd build the scene up was he'd play some free-for-all, he'd go, this is fun, he'd meet a guy who's better than him, he'd go, oh, you're in a team, you know, it would follow. So it seems like the deathmatch games have really, they've like, even in trying to make themselves competitive, they've forgotten like the core thing that you get the people in the first place. Do you see this?
I totally agree on that. I mean, it's the most important thing is always if a new player joins to create fun for him. It has to be fun. He's not playing a game because he thinks he needs to be the best. That's not your first ambition. 90% of the people are with the game. 90% want to have fun, and therefore you need to have, to some extent, an easy, learnable environment where you don't have to learn hand-eye coordination, plus the game world, plus the game script, plus what everyone else is doing at once, then you're gonna be hammered. That worked well with Free Fall, and that was one of the things that made it popular back then, and is missing in a lot of shooters these days. But if you, for example, look at Halo, which is relatively successful, or Call of Duty, they are very free-for-all based. A lot of the scene focuses on free-for-all. Then comes team, one-on-one they don't really have as far as I know. Halo does, but I don't know too much about it. But yeah, free-for-all is the learning practice mode of FPS shooters. Counter-Strike on the other side is a team game. It's a very straight team game. And due to the fact that the movement and all that stuff is relatively easy compared to Quake.
Compared to like bunny hopping and stuff,
Relatively
sure, yeah.
small compared, slow compared to the real hardcore FPS shooter. That makes it doable in the beginning.
Another thing, actually, another theory, kind of contrasting new school with the old school. It seems like, because the funny thing is, since Counter-Strike's one of the games I cover, and it's a game that's kind of, it's receding a little bit, or it's not the number one anymore. Yeah. I see the people within Counter-Strike saying the same things I heard from Quake. When Counter-Strike came out and they were like, oh, what do we have to, they would look at Counter-Strike and they'd go, what are they doing that we can do differently and stuff? But I always seem to think from looking at StarCraft 2 and League of Legends now, it's maybe a case that when Quake World was out, there wasn't really any other games you could play online. So if you were going to play, you would play Quake World.
Absolutely.
And then with Counter-Strike, there wasn't a StarCraft 2, there wasn't a League of Legends. So you have to figure some of the people who were the beginners we were using as like the fresh blood there, if they'd have had a choice, they probably would have played these other games anyway. The community would have fractured anyway, you know.
Yes. And
so people have kind of a mentality of like, let's go back to what was working before and that'll recharge the scene. You don't see this as like, how will the future go in that sense, do you think?
Well, I mean,
like, can deathmatch ever be on top again?
We have that discussion very regularly, especially if we talk about IEM. What is the future in terms of games of IEM? Which is a very, very difficult decision. I mean, we did Counter-Strike now for 7 seasons, right? 6, sorry.
6, yeah.
6 years we did Counter-Strike. In all of ESL, since basically 2000, our main focus was always Counter-Strike. So Counter-Strike 1.6 and plus Counter-Strike Source. Basically my work life, it was all around. It was always my focus. Although I was never a good player at Counter-Strike, I can play it obviously, and I was never hooked by it. I probably played 200-300 hours of Counter-Strike, which is tiny compared to the amount of time I invested in other games, which we can talk later about it. I mean, the thing is that a scene always has to be open for the next thing, and that was what happened with Counter-Strike. CSGO is around the corner. It's the same discussion people had with Quake 3. It's so funny. I have some private...
They don't know it, but you hear the same things, don't you?
Yeah, I hear actually probably the 3rd time now. Yeah, I mean, the discussion we do have right now with Counter-Strike, it's the same discussion we had with Quake 1 to Quake 2 to Quake 3. It's the same discussion we have with Dota 1 to Dota 2. It's the same discussion we had with Counter-Strike 1.6 to Counter-Strike Source and Counter-Strike Go.
And it was always like, oh, the new game is not as skilled, it's worse. It's always the person from the beginning.
Argument. Yeah. That's the main argument, that the new game is a noob game.
Yeah, that's always what they said.
But it's total bullshit. I mean, if I would take the arrogant stance, I would obviously say like, look guys, I played Quake 1.
Yeah.
Everything you guys do today is fantasy world. It's so skill-less compared to Quake 1, which I don't even believe in. I would use it to mock people.
Okay.
But it was very different. It was obviously a lot faster. It was obviously a lot straighter in terms of one shot, you're dead. It was very, very brutal. But was it more skill-oriented? Not at all. Now these people who are playing Counter-Strike today, they are a lot more skilled in their game than I ever was in Quake. So, in the end of the day, it's 2 things. A, you need to be open-minded about new games, or you don't need to be. It's your choice. But you shouldn't really think that you are skilled, you know best, and the other game is absolutely skillless. Because it's not. It's not true. It's stupid. I mean, the discussion between LoL and Dota is... It's very similar. I mean, there are things that are on purpose taken out, which add a skill layer, like denying creeps from LoL to Dota 2. But therefore the focus changed on what where you develop your skills. Is it more or less? It's bullshit. It's both the best League of Legends players in the world and the best Dota players in the world are on the same skill level.
Yeah, actually that's a good point, because contrasting those two, you can also see the same thing from Quake to Counter-Strike, because with League of Legends and Dota, the main complaint is usually from the Dota people, because they say, oh, it took more mechanical skill, or you needed to do certain things. But then when you talk to the LoL people and say, okay, well, what does LoL have that's different from Dota? They say because it's more individual in Dota, the team play element is like a little bit less reduced. Whereas if you don't have the individual skill, you have to focus all onto the team play aspect to make it more.
It just shifts. It shifts skill
and
priorities.
It's similar in Counter-Strike and Quake, because obviously, in terms of what you have to be doing every second of a game in Quake, it's more intensive. You're having to do a lot more things and be a lot better at a lot of things. But even in terms of the aiming, there was all these different types of aiming. There was projectiles, there was lightning gun, there was whatever, different styles of aiming. But Counter-Strike was kind of one type of aiming, but then you have to be very, very good at that.
Exactly, you have to be 100% precise on that. So it's just different skills.
Yeah. Do you think that's how the scene will continue then? That even if it fractures, it'll be like the games which can specialize in an area and do something very, very well, that they'll have a merit to them? Do you see this in terms of IEM?
I don't get the question, to be honest.
Like, do you think that's like how we can structure the future of esports? Like, yeah, we don't have to say like this game is better than this one. We just have to say this one has something that it does better than it does this very, very well on its own. Maybe this does something different.
Well, to be honest, that's a discussion we don't really do or have, because we're not too much about positioning a game somewhere. Okay. What we do as a league is we look at new games. We look, are they competitive? Are they to some extent interesting to watch? Do they have the depth that they need to have? And then we try them out. And in the end of the day, we obviously try to be the catalyst of a game to get big. But the players decide. I mean, we can market it to the players. We can say, this is cool. We offer you tournaments. We're working with the publishers. We're working with sponsors to create a platform for you. But if for Counter-Strike Go, 80% of CS 1.6 players will say it's shit or will say it's awesome after they tried it for longer than 10 minutes, it's nothing we can really change. So that's up to the players, and we're not there to teach them. The community
dictates the game, basically, that will be played.
To some extent, yes. Or to a large extent, because if there's interest there, then we'll offer it. We're a platform. We're not a game developer. We're not a game publisher. We don't have a direct interest, just an indirect. We just want the game to be big, then we can leverage and show it to people out there. That's what we do best.
Actually, the interesting thing about that is, even though I would probably disagree with some of the games because maybe they're not my personal preference. But the interesting thing about that is that's something I always saw was a problem in Deathmatch as well, because you had players who Quake World was their thing, or maybe Quake 2 was their thing. And then Quake 3, except for people who started with Quake 3, I don't think any of the players who came over, that was really the game they loved as much. Okay, so basically what happened was, they came over to Quake 3 like artificially, because CPL pumped it up with all this cash. And so you got a lot of players playing it at the pro level who were only doing it for the cash, for sure. And so you got into this situation where the game, to some degree, was kind of artificially supported. So then when CPL went away, for example, the legs fell out from under it. And it seems like that was like a problem for the games in this sense. And you're saying here it's like the opposite. That's what you're trying to do. The opposite. You're trying to let the community suggest the game that they want to play and see. And
absolutely.
Instead of saying we're going to do this game and you're
it never works on the long run. It never. I mean
the best example is Painkiller.
I wanted to bring it up. I mean, obviously you can create with money. You can create a marketing hype. But we always followed the idea of which. To really use what has substance. We're a German company at the end of the day, so we're to some extent conservative there. So, the best thing now is the StarCraft 2 hype, which is out there. Which is certainly out there. It's great and it's good, but it is a little bit overhyped. Because, on some media, if you read it, it basically gives you the impression that esport is StarCraft.
Yeah.
Which is bullshit. It is an extremely important part. It's one of the top 3, top 4 esports games right now on a global level. But it's not more and not less. It obviously is a role model to some extent because it's a one-on-one game, so therefore it has a different viewership appeal. And to create tournaments is a lot less complex for a one-on-one game or other than a team game. But on the other side, there are games which are much more played, and even the Counter-Strikes are, in terms of active playership, both of them, are not far away from StarCraft. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but I would assume that they're pretty much even on daily players.
Yeah.
What we try to do is get games which have a great player basis, games who have a good spectatorship basis, or to help to build it up, and games where we get support from the publishers. And we even tried with some games to make them big, to go away together with a publisher or a developer. For example, with League of Legends, we've basically done tournaments since summer of 2010, I think.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
That was... 90% of the esports scene didn't even know about League of Legends back then. They didn't have it on their map at all. And we did the same with World in Conflict, for example, where we totally failed.
Yeah.
And then we did it with League of Legends, where we totally rocked together. So it's a little bit of a gamble, because you don't know where a game develops in. But we try to really do very early activities with the game. And for example, for StarCraft, we were the first one who did StarCraft tournaments internationally, which was Go for StarCraft 2. No one else did something before. We had with Gamescom
2010, I think?
Was it 11 or 10? No, it was 10
yeah,
as well.
10.
We had the first international StarCraft tournament. Times were very different back then, but you know, we tried to be really early with the game and do all we can do to create a stable player basis, to create a healthy ecosystem would be a good word for that. A little bit of a buzzword, but still it describes it well, and go from there and make it as big as possible for everyone involved.
I mean, actually, to go back to what you were saying, when you mentioned part of a problem is when people kind of overhype something, or they hype it in the wrong way and gives people the wrong perception initially. That's something actually that's kind of relevant to Turtle and the way that ESL's being built up, is because if you compare the American approach to esports, which was dominating all the first half of the 2000s, and then the kind of the German or the European approach afterwards, we saw the American approach worked really well in the short term, because what you basically did was you kind of exaggerated the game, you blew it up, and you said, oh, you know, the gaming industry makes more than the movie. You make it sound as though it's all 10 times bigger.
You have all these bubble fantasy
And so
stories.
the problem is, you get a lot of money in the beginning because the guy who's giving you the money doesn't necessarily know, like, what would my return on this be?
Yeah.
But then it's like that can only work for so long, because eventually they realize, wait a minute, if I give you half as much, I get the exact same back for it, you know. Whereas, and so as a result, all the American companies pumped all the money in immediately and then just fell to nothing. And ESL kind of like step by step started just as a ladder into the German, and now it's international, but it took like 10 years or something.
Yeah, we
Did you always see this difference in approach?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we are not the ones who do bold bets, and we won't. We really want the ecosystem to expand step by step. And if one part of the ecosystem goes too fast, it's a risk for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
Whereas American companies seem to have the attitude to pump it up as fast as possible for whatever it takes. We go all in. We don't do all-ins. Which approach is the better one? Well, history has shown that ours is not too bad.
Sure. Or the others aren't around to tell their story anyway, you know.
Yeah, what the future will tell, I don't know. But, I mean, we will not change. For example, we know that for a couple of years with Intel Extreme Masters, we have been the only game in town. We've been the only real international tournament. Nowadays, for StarCraft at least, there are tons of international tournaments.
Yeah, sure.
So we're not alone. We're sharing the media attention with a lot of other tournaments. Some of them are doing certain things better than we do. Some of them are not. But we try to, as always, improve their step by step. And that's all we can do, and that's where we're happy with. On the other side, we don't have the pressure to be 10 times as big this year than last year. We simply don't. Because we're doing good. Time has shown that the esports scene overall is still in its very early days. So for me personally, I'm in the industry for, what is it now? 14, 15 years or something like that?
Yeah, that's about right, yeah.
I'll be glad to be there for another 10 or 20, because from the bottom of my heart I know that we're still in the early days. We're not like, there's nothing to lose if it takes a year more to get to 500,000 concurrent user, or 2 years more. Of course, it has an impact on my sponsorship income and all that stuff, which hurts me on the short run. But in the long run, I just know we're gonna get there. And that's why we're there for the long run.
I mean, you said earlier that like Counter-Strike was basically the bread and butter of ESL for a long time, building the brand up and IEM, etc. The interesting thing, if you look through the history of Counter-Strike, is there was always one tournament out of all of them, which was always considered like that's the tournament. So it was CPL, then it was ESWC, then eventually IEM came along and became like the tournament that everyone else looked to, and they copied all the rules, and it was always like this. Now that you're moving into StarCraft 2, you have things like GSL, you have MLGs pumping itself up. Is it actually important to IEM? Is it like a goal that you have to try and become a market leader again? Do you mind being like just behind the ones taking things from them? What is the goal?
Yeah, the goal is to have a great tournament and give value to the players and the community. And as long as we can do that, I don't mind if we're number 1 or number 2 or number 3 or number 4. We certainly wouldn't do it if we were number 25.
Yeah.
Not on that scale. But we're the only true global tournament. WCG used to be to some extent, but I mean, we do events. We do 5 to 6 international events every single year since a couple of years now. So we have a different model, a different approach than these other leagues you just spoke about. I mean, GSL is Korean. It's awesome. It's good, right? You won't hear me any bad word about them. But it's a different model. We, with our international tournaments, we will continue to do that. If we don't get the super hype, if someone else gets for StarCraft 20% more viewers, 30% more viewers, fine. We don't mind. Because it's still great value. If we would have like 20% of the viewers of someone else, then we would either have to step up to focus more on it, or to continue with another game. But, I mean, that's an important thing. And that's a good and a bad. We will never be a StarCraft league. We will never be a Counter-Strike league. We will never be a League of Legends league. We will be a multi-gaming league. That's what it's about. We want to show not 10 games, but 2, 3, 4, depending on where the cycle is, where the whole market is, and therefore offer a gaming festival throughout the world with the best esports title that out there.
Does it concern you that, I mean, StarCraft 2 is a great example because since, like you're saying, there's a million tournaments, and even more so, there's people who you've never even heard of them, and then tomorrow they've got a team and they're paying someone top salary, and it's like there's definitely a bubble feel to it.
Yeah.
As a result, it's like people seem to feel like it's like a gold rush again. Like they think we've got to figure out a way to monetize this, and so a lot of people now. You've heard recent things with MLG. It seems like the organizers are kind of clamoring to see if they can all go pay-per-view. Like they seem to think that's the way you monetize it. I know IEM at the moment, you do the HD passes and stuff, but will pay-per-view be, do you see that as part of the future? Because in a sense, isn't that kind of what the internet culture kind of has been like, we're not about paying for stuff really? People want things for free?
Well, there's two things. I don't think that an international tournament or a global tournament should be to any extent be pay-per-view. Because that's...
Well, imagine if the World Cup was pay-per-view. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's just bad for the sports, to be honest. Yeah. Because it limits it to some extent, or to a big extent. So what we always did, and I never say never, but 99% will follow, is always the freemium model. Do we want to get better at selling HD passes? Of course. Do we want the community to help us making money through HD Pass? Absolutely. So thank you for everyone who bought one. And hopefully we'll increase that by a big margin for the future, a big multiplier. But still, we always want everyone be able to watch. Would we try to do a pay-per-view tournament for a new game? Where that's just a tryout, maybe, but still not likely. So
it's not the direction then in general.
Not at all. I mean, we want to be a media phenomenon. We want to get esports on the next level in terms of viewership. That's our main goal. Not to try to set something up which to somehow breaks even through pay-per-view. That's really not our goal. Because that was esport never was about. Plus, I mean, the last thing is more an economical, theoretical thingy. I don't believe that you can actually, in a sport where you don't own the ecosystem on your own, make a pay-per-view model work on the long run. So that's more like...
you kind of drive someone to a free thing if you make a
Yeah,
pay-per-view?
competition is too high. I mean, how can you differentiate really well enough on that? And I don't want to comment on what other people did, but if you look at other working pay-per-view models, it's basically UFC as the big model, but they own everything. They own the players, they own all the rights. It's classic sports where you have a monopoly for the organizers. Actually, everything like that, somewhere is a monopoly in that chain. And I don't think that would be good for esports at all. I thought a couple of years ago, it would be great if ESL would be a monopoly in esports. But to be honest, I learned a lot of lessons throughout that time, and it's good that there are other tournament organizers, because the competition gets everyone to step up. So yeah, I don't believe that they can on the long run make that sustainable, the pay-per-view, just because you don't own the ecosystem.
So to get some more Quake questions in before we get too far off,
we're not in the future anymore now, right? In the past.
In terms of, I mean, obviously you were involved in TDM for so long. One thing that always interested me about the German teams in TDM, and Quake especially, was if you look throughout time, I mean, maybe the most skilled players, people would probably always say were the Swedish players. They always had the craziest skills.
Yes.
If we had to compare it to football, since I know you're a fan of football, you could compare the Swedish players to maybe the Brazilian players. They were just so talented, and then they had a natural chemistry. But the German players always had a certain level of success, reminding me of the German football team, because they had a system. And even though you might have had different players, like the system seemed to work. And I mean, SK was a famous team, MTW, unmatched. Like, what do you think it was about? Is it the German mindset? Is it something you took from sports yourself? What do you think it is?
Yeah, you probably can compare it to the soccer stuff. We were, back at that time, all the German teams, what's always important was that we had a really, really competitive national scene. That's one thing. If you have a really competitive national scene, that will make you better. That will prepare you for the international ones. You can see that in soccer, whenever there's a good national league, then they're going to do good in Champions League. For example, in Spain, Real Madrid and Barcelona are only as good as they are because they have each other.
Yeah.
If there wouldn't be the other one, then they would lose that competition which makes them better every day. So I think that's an important part of it. In terms of game system, the match system, I think that what was very relevant in German teams from the start was that we had a clear hierarchy. I don't think that the other teams had that to that extent. Therefore, it was a little bit, SK was founded as Schröd Kommando. Commander is a military thingy. So we were like really,
Even mortal teamwork.
Yeah, mortal teamwork. Someone calls a shot, we have a strategy, we're gonna adapt it if it doesn't work, but we'll mainly follow that strategy. We will not play free for all, we will play a team game. And the German teams had that very, very much in their mindset, and were very straightforward with that. Which I think was part of the success, yes. Also, if you look at today's scene, if you look at the Swedish Counter-Strike teams, they pretty much have exactly that type of working. So maybe we were the first ones or early to embrace this type of how to run a team in game, but it's not really exclusive to German teams at all. It probably was at a certain time.
Sure. Speaking about Kane, your brother, we said at the beginning of this chat, I set the scene for people that really Team Deathmatch was where it at, and 1v1 was more just like bragging rights, or if you were at the LAN, you played it.
It was a lot about bragging rights, a lot about bragging rights.
Your brother was basically one of the first people to play in like the first real international tournament, the TGI.
Yeah.
Being
it was 1998 or 1999?
99, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I always mix it up.
Because it was just before Quake 3, I remember.
Yeah, half a year, basically. Yeah, it's very likely.
Being as you were like the older brother and he was like another thing I should probably set the scene for people is that back then, the average age of the gamer was probably 20 plus, I'm guessing, because you had to have a modem, you had to have your own phone line.
It's true.
There weren't that many 16-year-old kids.
Thingy.
So, yeah.
It wasn't elite thingy.
So if you were
Mostly
actually,
students, actually.
Yeah, if you were a kid, I mean, you were saying it's 16, it's even before university. To be that young playing and be good was kind of a really rare thing. I can see why he became like a star in this sense. Was he always the best of your family?
By far. I mean, he's if you look at the family, he was always the most talented in any type of dexterity sport. Everything that included dexterity, including soccer, he always had that natural talent. You could basically, I remember giving him he never played tennis. Never really, I mean, he did a little bit as a kid just for fun.
Yeah.
But probably, let's say, 20 hours as a kid. And then he was 12, and we were starting to play tennis just for fun. And after 20 hours of playing tennis, he was by far the best of anyone. With people playing a couple of hundred hours tennis, or even 1,000 hours. He was beating them. Obviously not professionals and stuff, but he was, and still is, unbelievable fast at picking up everything which includes hand-eye coordination, dexterity, and all that stuff. And through that, he was not at any point in time the best, because if we others practiced really hard, we passed him. But he catched up so quickly and then moved past us again that overall he was by far the most talented player. Simple like that.
In terms of, let me think.
Oh, by the way, when we still play games together. Most of the old SK crew, actually.
Oh, okay.
So we played for the last couple of years Dota,
okay.
And he has by far the least game time. But whenever a point in time is where he plays for 2 weeks as regular as the others do, he'll catch up and pass them. So it's still the thing.
Actually, that's the thing I wanted to close out on, is that if you think about the early days of Quake, I mean, the funny thing is, people forget that you would have a player who for 3 months, everyone would be like, this guy's great, and then 6 months later, you never heard from him again, and then no one even remembers who that guy is. But there's so many people who were around in the early days of Quake, the early European scene of even Counter-Strike and stuff, who now, like you're saying, 10, 15 years later, they're actually key figures within the companies. I mean, even within ESL TV, you have Neok, who used to play in the Quake 3.
Exactly.
You have all these people where they've disappeared off, but they're behind the scenes somewhere, Does it feel kind of satisfying to you personally that it's kind of like the original people actually kind of grew it and then they're still here as well? It's not like we grew it and then gave it to someone else, like you run everything now.
I think that there's a healthy mixture in that, because I mean the esports scene is not dominated by the 100 players which were there in 1997.
Yeah.
But probably 10 or 15% of these people are still to some extent involved. For example, a funny story, there was a guy called OCR Killer. He was one of the first Ocrana players. I still do business with him. OCR Slop. I'm not a friend, but we're good, we're chatting here and then. So I think it's good that these people are still around, and including me, obviously. But I think it's good that there comes new talent all the time. I learned I met so many new people, a lot of very bright and smart ones throughout the years, and a lot of them started working in esports, a lot of them did other stuff, a lot of them come back, some go to companies, some people call me, which I played 7 years ago or 8 years ago, and say look, I'm in marketing at this company now, let's do some stuff together. For the last example was Dennis Schellhase, the
FIFA twin, yeah.
He's working now in marketing at Synology. So, there's these people who either stay directly in the ecosystem or go to the things around the ecosystem, which makes it more healthy in the long run for everyone involved. So, am I proud about that? Proud is the wrong word. Happy that people who did esports are a lot of times successful in their later lives, and most of them don't forget where they come from.
Since SK, you were basically one of the faces of SK when it began, and you were associated with it for so long. Even when Turtle and CPL was starting, it wasn't until CPL was getting pretty big that you kind of made the split. We have to split the two companies and make sure it's impartial and stuff. Do you still at heart think of yourself as an SK man?
No.
You divorced it completely?
I need I really tried to get that out of my head, just because it would be so unprofessional. Just because in 2000, you said there was a time when I was at basically 1.5 roles, working really for ESL, and still hadn't my fingers inside of SK. And people were complaining about that, and they were, from a transparency perspective, they were right. And there were some how do you say, Verschwörungstheorie Germany. There were some like conspiracy theories that we just do that to make SK big and all that stuff, which is obviously bullshit, because especially at that time where the switch was done, people watched very closely what SK did, what ESL did, because they were like really trying to find, stuff we didn't do well. But then I think 2001 we really made a split, and since then I had to teach myself, okay, all teams are equal. Don't really have any favorites.
Is it still weird for you to see like the SK logo, or to see?
Of course.
It's funny that the name doesn't even mean Short Commando anymore. So in a way, it's kind of strange in that sense.
It's true. It moved away, and the logos changed and stuff like this. So some of the identification moved away with time, and some of it is still professionally cut, which I do. But on the positive side is that there's a couple of clients I really, really like, and obviously the ones who are there for the long run. So an SK, a Mouse Sports, an MTW. What is it? Team Deathmatch is around quite a long time. Fnatic certainly. Navi, although they're like only 3 years old and stuff like this, but to be honest, I really, really like most of the big teams. Well, and I'm a fan of this player, so there's different things. I know all the managers, and for me it's very, very important to have a good relationship with them, because I need their honest feedback on what we shall improve, what we shall do different. I want them to know that they can Skype me, or to write me a text or email me if they have any issues, because in the end of the day, I want them to do good, I want us to do good. I don't want to create any problems which are any dramas for no whatever reason. Okay,
so to have like a fun final question, I'm going to let you use your kind of, for people who never saw you play, relate it to pick a German football player, any period in time, who played football the way Griff played Quake.
Probably in terms of my role and all that stuff, I would say Schweinsteiger, what he's playing now. So I was the defensive mid who could go into offensive. Every time he really tried to be an offensive player, he didn't do as good as he should do. So I think his role fits relatively well. And even though if I've been the captain for a long time, but even if I played in a team or a mixed team, I tend to be the most vocal one in the team. And I probably have a little bit of Oliver Kahn as well in terms of passion. I really hate to lose.
Okay, so to finish things up, just say any parting words you want to give people.
I would say be open to new games and communities. Don't hate Counter-Strike Go too much, because all that discussion, this skill-less game is really, really, really subjective. Have fun, and I hope you enjoy IEM, ESL, go for LoL, go for SC2, all the stuff we do, and we're trying to offer more.
Danke.
And, cheer for your team.
Danke.
Danke.